In the summer of 1675, the geography of New England was a fragile geometry of shared forests, stone walls, and uneasy boundaries. For 50 years, two civilizations had occupied the same soil, bound by trade and a silence that masqueraded as peace. But maps are brittle things. Under the weight of expanding settlements and shrinking tribal sovereignty, the geometry began to fracture. This is not the story of a hero or a villain. This is the chronicle of the bloodiest conflict in American history, a 14-month collapse that redefined a continent. This is the story of a year, the frontier burn. By the 1670s, the tension was no longer social, it was environmental. The English population had surged, and with it came a hunger for land that no treaty could satisfy. Fences began to crisscross the wilderness, carving the woods into private property. English cattle trampled native cornfields, and colonial courts began to enforce English law over sovereign tribal territories. The friction was constant. When the legal execution of 3 Wampanoag men took place in June 1675, it was the final failure of diplomacy. The spark was struck in Plymouth, but the fire would consume the entire coast. The war did not begin with a battle. It began with a disappearance. Across the borderlands, farmhouses were abandoned. Then, the smoke began to rise. The English militias, trained in the open field formations of Europe, marched into a landscape that had become a weapon. This was the Skulking Way, a strategy of ambush, rapid strikes, and vanishing into the brush. By the autumn, the frontier was in full retreat. Towns like Northfield and Deerfield were leveled. To the English, every thicket held a ghost. To the tribal alliance, every settlement was an encroachment to be purged. December 1675, the war turned from a rebellion into a struggle for existence. In the middle of the coldest winter in decades, a massive colonial force launched a preemptive strike against the neutral Narragansett. They marched through waist-deep snow into a frozen marsh in modern-day Rhode Island. What followed was a massacre of logistics and fire. The tribal fort was breached, and the winter shelters were set ablaze. The fire did not distinguish between combatant and non-combatant. The Great Swamp Fight ensured that there would be no negotiated peace, only an ending. By the spring of 1676, the momentum shifted. It was not a victory of musketry, but of hunger. Because the warriors were in the field, the planting seasons had been missed. The English adopted a scorched-earth policy, destroying fishing weirs and burning seed corn. The War of Bullets became a war of calories. Without food, the tribal alliance began to fragment. The resistance didn't break in a single moment. It eroded under the weight of a long, starving winter. By August, the organized movement had collapsed, and the silence that returned to the woods was the silence of a void. The cost was absolute. Per capita, more people died in these 14 months than in the American Revolution or the Civil War. For the indigenous peoples, it was a catastrophe that ended their traditional sovereignty in New England. For the colonists, it was a grim baptism. They had survived a war without the help of the British crown, forging a new, hardened identity in the ashes of the frontier. The fences were rebuilt, but the world was different. The shared frontier was gone, replaced by a conquest that set the pattern for the centuries to follow. History is written in the soil long after the fires go out. If you want to explore the systemic forces that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Leave a comment below on which historical turning point we should analyze next. Thank you for watching.